Old Clipston was a beautiful village, small, almost like a hamlet, really. And in the early days, when we bought the cottage, it was just a single-storey cottage. They actually added the upper floor, so it did date back to the 1770s. And a lot of some of the stone might have actually come from King John's palace. Yeah. There was some sort of rumours that might have happened, and I feel sure that probably did. When we first moved to the house on Squires Lane, we had such a welcoming there. There was a lady in a bungalow who lived at the back of us, Brenda, and the next door neighbours, the Dolans, Irish Catholic family, because our cottage was semi-detached. They were very welcoming. The Escritts, who lived up in it was a very big house at the top, and then the Shaw Browns at the very top. But we had a very large lump of coal delivered to the house when we first moved in, because we had an open fire. And that's a very traditional, apparently, Nottinghamshire welcome, isn't it? Old Clipston, the social aspect was the dog and duck. So on Monday night you went down and you did the quiz, and it was very much an old-fashioned pub then. But nowadays it's got very posh, hasn't it? Or it did, and then it had a period when it was closed, and so it no longer seemed to be a local pub. I knew of the local pubs in Clipston, but without being too kind of posh, I just didn't. The Squinting Cat didn't float my boat. And I'm not even sure I even went in there. I mean, we did shop at the Co-op, and Vicar Water was somewhere that we, in the very early days before, it's become very much now lovely paths round, and Rumbles wasn't there then, so there was no cafe there, but Vicar Water was somewhere that we used to do a circular walk. So Vicar Water, and then down back to the Dog and Duck, and then back through the village and home. But see, Old Clipston in those days was still quite dangerous, no real pavements through, so a buggy through the village. Unfortunately, we were very car dependent, which is not really what you want, is it? But with youngsters, it wasn't always easy. So we had this strange society. It was called the Squires Lane Pothole Society, because Squires Lane was always very potholed, and because nobody had real ownership of it, nobody really bothered to upkeep it. It was too expensive. Couldn't ask the council to do it, and really it slowed the traffic down, and we weren't that bothered because we didn't want a lot of traffic on it anyway. But we used to go out with head torches and helmets, courtesy of Norman, who worked originally down the pit. And we just used to go singing and jumping potholes and collecting money for charity, which is... So there was a certain madness. And in fact, I remember the day that I was having David, 1988, 6th of April, I'm allowed to say this on tape, my waters broke in the garden, and Margaret was the first person to come down, the nurse. She came down and she said, "Where is your husband? He should be with you now." And all I could say was, "Well, he's at surgery, he can't leave, and he's told me the longer I stay at home, the better it will be for me, and that because you're around, he doesn't have to rush back. He's got evening surgery to do." I was out planting seedlings in the garden, and when he did come, I was quite well advanced, and I said, "Thank God you're back." And he said, "Well, I've been delivering cabbages to some of my patients, because we also grew cabbages in the garden." And Margaret gave him a what for and said, "Why have you done this?" And anyway, it was okay, because David didn't come very quickly, even in Watersborough. But there was such a reception when I got home. Balloons, blue balloons on the door, balloons in the garden, flags going up. Oh, it was just delightful. And that's community for you, isn't it?
Yeah,
lovely.
Definitely, yeah.
88. Yeah. But I've got to tell you about 1990, because that's when Robbie was born. And that was, I don't know whether this has been mentioned or you have any recollection, but it was the year when we had terrific snow in the December. Right. And I always remember 1990 because that was when Robbie was only a few months old. He was born in September, so he's about 3 months old. And all the power went down in Clipston, Old Clipston. Edwardstowe had theirs on sooner, so Jim was able to go to work and have a shave and a shower unlike his family, where we just had the coal fire, no power, 2 doors down, I won't mention his name because that could get struck off from the recording, he had a generator, but he didn't share it with us. So we were in the situation whereas we were making stew over the fire, and the stew, it's like good old Victorian times, just things get added to it, and we would invite the neighbours to come and eat with us. But we had candles, and the feature of this, we had batteries for the radio, so we could listen to Radio Nottingham, but we had a lot of candles. And this was the time that my eldest son, who would have been 2 years old, so just about talking, we'd get to sort of darkness, which came at about 4 o'clock in the winter, wouldn't it? We lit the candles, and because he'd heard his daddy speaking on the phone, so Jim was on call for Centre Parks from our house. I was nominally also on call because wives, they had that duty back in the day. So I couldn't go anywhere, but we couldn't go anywhere because the babies were young and we had no power. So I also answered the phone, but every time Jim answered the phone back in those days, it would be, he'd be very polite to the person, but then afterwards the phone would get slammed. It was a time we had phones on the wall. He'd slam the phone on the wall with such strength that the phone fell off on a number of occasions, and he would swear, which I won't do for this recording. But the 2-year-old used to go around and say, "Not the effing phone again." And then when we had to light candles at 4 o'clock, he then transcribed that to "not the effing candles again." And that was the point at which we decided we had to clean up our language in the house. In the summer, the roads seem to be quite beautiful and green and verdant. You get to winter time, and there was all the coal spoil on the side, and when it snowed, it didn't take long for the coal to blacken it, and I just thought, oh, it's a shame, isn't it? So there was always that feeling there was an awful lot of coal on the roads, and those were just the aspects of mining that was the reality, wasn't it?
So did your life improve then when the pit shut?
I think the environment certainly did, but obviously for folk it wasn't good. People out of work, and I think knowing about the welfare that was open, it was people's lives, wasn't it? And so there was always this sort of sadness that people were no longer in the employment where their social lives and leisure and everything. Fishing obviously was a big thing, and I do remember the fishing shop in Clipston, and also meeting people down at Spa Ponds. I do look at where we lived in Old Clipston, and access to Sherwood Forest, and just the mining as well. So there was Crown Hill. We've walked up there a few times with the kids and with grandparents. So our claim to fame is that Jim's dad, he loved his walks, and we did get him up Crowney well into his 80s, which was phenomenal. Wow. And it was the only sort of real high point, wasn't it? From there you could see all around, a beautiful, beautiful aspect. And from the golf course you could see Crowney. And of course the slag heaps were very prominent at that time, which was never the prettier sight. I mean, I think now it's sort of regenerated, hasn't it? To the extent that you can't really see anything of the old coal mining. But of course you've got the headstocks, and I absolutely applaud the fact that they should have listed status. Yeah, to remind us of our past and our heritage.